Some people who lost everything still remember it. You don't forget, said one local whose family lost everything in the tornado. It just seems to play in your memory over and over again. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. It was the 1946 Tecumseh Tornado, also known as the Windsor Tornado, the most powerful ever to hit the Windsor area and still ranks within the top 3 tornadoes ever to hit Canada, and it hit this day in weather history. All right, off the top, straight up, I am not a storm chaser. Not a storm chaser. But I told you the story on this podcast of when I was 15 and while living in Barrie, Ontario for just 1 year, I witnessed the raw power of a major tornado outbreak that occurred in Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Ontario on May 31st of 1985. Then, on August 21st, 2011, I was jogging after my morning show shift at the time at the Weather Network when my phone interrupted me. It was work. They needed me to report back to the station immediately. I was going on location to Goderich, Ontario. They had just been walloped by a ferocious tornado that spun up off Lake Huron as a waterspout. The scenes I witnessed there were nothing short of otherworldly. And then, a little later on, they were under the gun where another outbreak of tornadoes was spreading across the same region. I tell you that to tell you this. Those 2 tornado occurrences are among the top 10 worst in Canadian history. I was there for both, and I'm not a storm chaser. So to read of this event that after over 7 decades still ranks in the top 3, naturally it's a story that needs to be retold. It happened on June 17th of 1946. The tornado was the most powerful to ever hit Windsor, Ontario. It was surveyed as a Category F4 in strength. It was the 3rd deadliest tornado in Canadian history, and it holds that position because 17 people were killed. Hundreds more were injured. On that fateful day, it touched down near River Rouge, Michigan. It then crossed the Detroit River and made landfall in the Brighton Beach neighborhood of Windsor and was on the move. Along its devastating path of destruction, around 400 homes were affected, being damaged or otherwise completely destroyed. Oh, and when you talk about destruction, this one doesn't just affect trees. No. With this tornado, whole orchards were uprooted and 15 farm buildings were flattened. Those who either witnessed it firsthand or saw the pictures in the days that followed were astonished at the intensity of it all. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. Railroad boxcars were thrown off their tracks and tossed onto their sides. Roofs of houses were torn off, and some houses were lifted right off their foundations and thrown. Other buildings just completely knocked down or otherwise destroyed. So, what happened? The path of the tornado started in Brighton Beach, but then went through what today is known as La Salle, then crossed Malden Road, Huron Line. From there, it marched along the 3rd concession until Howard Avenue, and then continued across Grand Marias Road to Pilette Road, and there it went eastward through La Salle East, and finally lost its destructive force in Tecumseh, then known as the Tecumseh Tornado. The storm's path was roughly 30 meters wide at its base, so anything within that diameter of the tornado was sure to be chewed up and spit out. The most frightening stat is that it stayed that way as it traveled a total of 60 kilometers. The storm's damage ranged from F3 to F4, but looking back at survey photos and hearing from those who are still there and still remember it, they still insist they see F5 damage from completely destroyed houses that again were lifted and thrown clear from their foundations. But not every story associated with this devastation was a negative one. Since the tornado had cut power to the Windsor Star's main printing offices downtown, across the river, the Detroit News offered to help them print their newspapers at their printing facilities until the stars were repaired. For this event, given the sensitivity of the information that needed to get out and the timeliness of it, the Detroit Free Press even gave the Star priority so they could report the news of the tornado to the cities of Windsor, Detroit, and the rest of Ontario. That, my friends, is cross-border love and care, and that went a long way in helping heal the hurt felt by everyone affected. And it also made available this many years on archived data and photos to commemorate or further investigate the 1946 Tecumseh or Windsor tornado. Still among the top 3 tornadoes in Canadian history, it happened on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is June 18th, and we look back to the year 1972 when Hurricane Agnes not only got all hurricane over the Gulf states, but then it fed another area of low pressure with a ton of moisture when it redeveloped into another tropical storm in the mid-Atlantic. And that's tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.